Have you ever stopped to think about what it really means to be a socialist? I'm not referring to academic definitions, cold and distant, or to the enthusiastic speeches of those who believe, out of habit or ignorance, that the socialist utopia is an unattainable ideal due to some whim of destiny. I'm referring to the naked and raw essence, stripped of illusions, of what goes on in the mind and heart, those who truly stand under the red flag. Being a socialist is not an innocent choice, like preferring red over blue. It is not a lifestyle option, like choosing a diet or a way of dressing. It is something much deeper, more visceral, and at the same time more disturbing. Being a socialist is, first and foremost, embracing a revolt that is not satisfied with just pointing out injustices or complaining about the state of things. It is a revolt against the very nature of man, against what he is in his essence. Make no mistake, socialism, at its root, does not aim to improve what is already there. It wants to destroy, annihilate, and from the ashes shape something new, different, according to the dictates of a logic that, no matter how much it is insisted otherwise, is anti-human. However, here lies the first great trap that ensnares the spirit of the socialist. He does not realize, or refuses to acknowledge, that by trying to remake man and society according to a rational plan, elaborated in offices or in fervent assemblies, he places himself above what is human. He imagines himself capable of judging all of humanity, of separating the wheat from the chaff, and of rewriting the rules that govern human coexistence. And in doing so, he places himself not as a savior, but as a potential tyrant, ready to sacrifice lives upon lives in the name of an ideal that, deep down, he does not even fully comprehend. Here, history does not lie. Throughout the 20th century, we saw leaders emerge who, intoxicated by this distorted vision, claimed millions of lives without hesitation. And all of this in the name of a greater good, promise of equality, of justice, of a paradise on earth that, in order to be built, required an epic hell beforehand. How many corpses are necessary to achieve utopia? For the socialists, this is a question that never has a definitive answer, because there will always be another sacrifice, a new excuse to postpone the realization of the dream. And you, who wonder what it means to be a socialist, must reflect on this. It is not a mere opinion, an intellectual choice among several possible ones. To be a socialist is to embrace a way of thinking that inevitably leads to the destruction of what is most precious in the human being, their individuality, their freedom, and ultimately, their own life. It is not a matter of sympathizing with a cause. It is a matter of accepting the consequences of an idea that, throughout history, has proven to be lethal. So I ask again, what does it mean to be a socialist? Do you really know what you're getting into? And more importantly, are you willing to bear the weight of the consequences that this choice brings with it? Think carefully, because we are not talking about a passing trend or a harmless academic theory. We are talking about something that, once embraced, can consume everything around it, including you. Now that we have glimpsed the essence of what it means to be a socialist, it is time to face the stark reality of the numbers. These are not cold, distant numbers or mere statistical data that dissolve over time. They are figures laden with pain, with lives cut short, with stories that never reached their conclusion. We are talking about over 100 million souls, each one extinguished under the pretext of an ideal that turned out to be a nightmare. Imagine for a moment what 100 million deaths mean. It's not an abstraction. It's a global genocide, carnage that surpasses in horror all the wars, tyrannies, and natural disasters combined over the past 4 centuries. And that number, by itself, should be enough to make anyone hesitate before uttering, with enthusiasm or unconcern, the word socialism. But for many, these numbers are relegated to oblivion, swept under the rug of history, as if they were mere inconveniences in the face of the grandeur of the socialist dream. Hunger, misery, terror. These words resonate in every corner where socialism has taken root. The Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, North Korea. All these names evoke images of unimaginable suffering, of societies crushed by the weight of a system that promised liberation but delivered oppression. The truth is that socialism, in all its manifestations, not only failed to create the utopia it promised, but produced results so devastating that its shadow extends to this day. And it is not about isolated incidents or leaders who deviated from the correct path. No, the horror of socialism is inscribed in its own logic, in its attempt to shape society with iron and fire, without space for dissent, freedom for the individual. The Black Book of Communism documents in detail these horrors, for those who have the courage to open its pages. And there is no escape. The numbers are clear, the evidence is overwhelming, and the verdict is inescapable. But then, why in the face of such evidence are there still those who defend this ideology? Why are there still those who look at socialism with hopeful eyes, ignoring the sea of blood it left in its wake? Perhaps because for many the seduction of the ideal outweighs the brutality of the fact. Perhaps because the promise of a perfect society is irresistible to those who refuse to face the harsh reality of human nature. The devastating impact of socialism cannot be underestimated. It is an open wound in the history of humanity, a scar that reminds us of the price to be paid when dangerous ideas are put into practice. Every life lost, every tear shed, every stifled cry are silent testimonies of a tragedy that cannot be forgotten. And it is up to us, here and now, to ensure that these voices are not silenced again. To understand the true essence of socialism, it is necessary to go beyond slogans, promises of equality and social justice that easily seduce hearts and minds. It is necessary to delve into the depths of what truly constitutes the core of this ideology, the inseparable intertwining of political and economic power. Socialism, in its most basic conception, presents itself as a force destined to correct the injustices of the world, attenuating or eliminating differences in economic power. However, to accomplish this feat, it finds itself obliged to concentrate massive political power. Power that not only supersedes that of the rich, but is also capable of controlling, subjugating, and reorganizing the entire economic structure of a society. And here lies the fatal trap. In order to level the differences in economic power, socialism needs to create even deeper disparities in political power. Think about it for a moment. There is no way for a political system to be effective in its task of arbitration without being more powerful than the conflicting parties. This means that in socialism, the state must become such a powerful entity that it not only confronts the rich, but also directly manages the wealth that once belonged to them. The promise of a classless society, where power and wealth are distributed equitably, reveals itself to be a farce, a lie that conceals the creation of a new ruling class, more powerful and wealthier than any that has ever existed. This new elite is not just a caste of rulers, it is a caste of despots that controls at the same time political apparatus and the economic resources. The higher the position of an individual or group in the political hierarchy, the more wealth they will have under their direct control. And what is this, if not the purest and most brutal concentration of power? In socialism, political power merges with economic power, creating a tyranny that cannot be challenged without the complete destruction of the system. But there is a perverse irony here. When, finally, socialism collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, what remains? Long-awaited equality does not emerge. On the contrary, the elite that once dominated the state and its wealth simply reinvents itself, adapting to the new reality. Now, with the same hands that once crushed the people in the name of socialism, this elite self proclaims itself bourgeois and continues to exercise its power, only under new banners. The socialist experience, then, does not end in equality. It perpetuates it in a new form, or transforms into a wild and uncontrolled capitalism where the old nomenclatura becomes the new ruling class. Here lies the essence of socialism, an illusory promise that leads to the concentration of power in the hands of a few, the creation of an untouchable elite, and the perpetuation of the inequalities it promised to eliminate. There is no room for a third way. Either socialism freezes into tyranny, or it dissolves into something equally brutal and savage. This is the truth that few dare to face, but that is inevitable for those who propose to understand socialism in its entirety. Here we reach the crucial point that unveils the self-destructive nature of socialism, its fatal contradiction. It is not a simple miscalculation or occasional deviation. It is a structural flaw intrinsic to the socialist logic itself, which condemns it to failure from the moment its ideas begin to materialize. Socialism aims to create a society where economic inequalities are eradicated, where everyone has access to the same resources, the same opportunities. But to achieve this goal, it needs to concentrate absolute power in the hands of the state, power capable of subjugating all aspects of economic and political life. And that is where the contradiction lies. In trying to eliminate economic inequalities, socialism ends up creating even deeper and insurmountable political inequality. For socialism to work, it is necessary for the state to be omnipotent, control all resources, all decisions, to become the sole source of power. But when power is concentrated in such an absolute manner, it becomes equally corrupt. The rulers, those who should be the guardians of equality, become a new ruling class, a bureaucratic oligarchy that, in practice, possesses all wealth and means of production. This new elite is untouchable, immune to the laws it imposes, living in a luxury that not even the most voracious capitalists could dream of. And this concentration of power is not accidental. It is inevitable. Socialism, in seeking total equality, creates the conditions for total tyranny. And this tyranny, in turn, perpetuates the inequalities it promised to abolish. The result is that, in socialism, promise of a fairer world becomes the reality of a more oppressive and unequal world. The equality that socialism aims for is in fact a mirage, always out of reach, always elusive, while tyranny and oppression become the only constant. This contradiction is fatal because it does not allow socialism to fulfill its promises. Socialism, in order to be realized, needs to destroy the very foundation on which it stands. It needs to sacrifice the principles of freedom and justice in the name of an illusory equality. And in doing so, it condemns itself to an endless cycle of repression, violence, and failure. There is no escape from this logic. It is a dead end, where every attempt to achieve the socialist ideal only deepens the miseries that it supposedly should eliminate. Fatal contradiction of socialism is this. Promise of equality inevitably becomes the practice of the most brutal inequality. The dream turns into a nightmare, and the lives sacrificed in the name of this dream are the silent witnesses of an ideology that, from the beginning, carries within itself the seed of its own destruction. It is not a matter of bad luck or ill-intentioned leaders. It is the essence of socialism that condemns it to failure. And it is this truth that needs to be faced head-on, without subterfuge, without illusions. The degradation of human consciousness in socialism is a matter of extreme gravity and depth, a deterioration that is not limited to economic or political spheres, but reaches to the core of human nature itself. By embracing socialism, the individual is not only engaging with an ideology, they are subjecting themselves to an insidious process of spiritual and intellectual impoverishment. At the heart of socialism lies the promise of a utopia where all differences and inequalities will be eliminated. However, to achieve this utopia, socialism demands the complete subordination of individual consciousness to the collective, from personal thought to the dominant ideology. This process of subjugation is not just a matter of adjusting behaviors or suppressing divergent opinions. It is a profound transformation of how individuals perceive themselves and the world around them. To be socialist is, in fact, to resign oneself to a form of existence where critical thinking is downgraded, where individual discernment is subordinated to state dogma. Human consciousness, in its essence, is a capacity to question, to reflect upon reality, to seek truth beyond imposed conventions. However, under the socialist regime, this capacity is systematically corrupted. The idea of a greater good, promise of a new social order, becomes the justification for the annihilation of individuality. The individual is compelled to relinquish their own judgment in favor of forced consensus, and their own consciousness is shaped and distorted by the dominant ideology. This process of degradation is not merely an accidental consequence, but a fundamental characteristic of the system. Ideological coercion, censorship, and repression are not just tools to ensure political conformity, they are instruments for transforming human consciousness itself. The mind is shaped to accept the unacceptable, conform to the unreal, and above all, to relinquish its own moral and intellectual integrity. The degradation of consciousness in socialism is a silent tragedy, a massacre of human dignity that occurs not with visible weapons and violence, but with the subtle and insidious corrosion of the spirit. Socialism, in promising a new world, delivers a universe where the ability to think independently and critically is eradicated, where the individual becomes a mere appendage of the state machine. The true cost of socialism is this: the destruction of the very essence of human being, the loss of the capacity to reflect, question, live a genuinely human life. And this is something that once lost may never be regained. The degradation of human consciousness is the indelible mark that socialism leaves in its wake, a scar that becomes an integral part of the destiny of those who, in the name of a utopian ideal, sacrifice the most precious of all, freedom and the integrity of the spirit. The reflection on socialism is not a mere academic exercise or an intellectual curiosity. It carries a profound and immediate responsibility, a responsibility that each of us must take seriously and commit to. Socialism, with its promise of a perfect and egalitarian world, hides a brutal and inescapable truth. Its true legacy is a field of destruction, a ruin of lives and consciences. It is an ideology that, in attempting to forge a new world, ends up shaping a hell on earth. Historical experience shows us that socialism not only fails to achieve its ideals, but more tragically, transforms the very human condition into a shadow of what it could be. Rejecting socialism is not just a matter of political choice. It is a matter of preserving human dignity, individual freedom, and the ability to think and act autonomously. The responsibility to reject socialism is therefore a moral responsibility. It is the recognition that promises of utopia cannot justify the brutal and oppressive means used to achieve them. It is the commitment to defend freedom of thought and the integrity of human consciousness against any ideology that seeks to subjugate them in the name of a supposedly greater good. Each of us, in contemplating the lessons of the past and the painful truths that socialism has revealed, must take responsibility for protecting the legacy of freedom and dignity that has been bestowed upon. We must be vigilant, not only against the return of systems that have already proven to be disastrous, but also against the seductions of ideas that, under a facade of benevolence, hide destructive intentions. The responsibility to reject socialism is a responsibility for our own humanity, for the ability to live authentically and freely. It is a call to not forget the lessons of history, to not repeat the mistakes of the past, and above all, it is a call to defend, with all our might, the values that make the human being more than just a pawn in a grand ideological experiment. This responsibility is the mark of our own conscience, proof that, despite temptations and empty promises, we are not willing to sacrifice our freedom, our dignity, and our humanity. The true path is that of preserving the human spirit, and the rejection of socialism is a crucial step in this journey.